The charge nurse didn't even look up from her clipboard when Vera walked in. "Housekeeping uses the side entrance," she said, still writing. "You're blocking the main corridor." Vera Stahl shifted the supply cart to the left and said nothing. She had learned, in the 6 months since taking the job at Hargrove Regional, that saying nothing was usually the fastest way through a room. The badge clipped to her gray uniform read Environmental Services, and that was all anyone needed to know. She moved past the nurse's station, past the dry erase board listing room assignments, past the framed mission statement about dignity and compassionate care that someone had hung slightly crooked and no one had ever straightened. She had noticed it on her first day. She still noticed it every morning. The corridor on the 3rd floor smelled like floor wax and something medicinal underneath it. The particular scent of a place that was trying very hard to pretend it wasn't what it was. Vera found it oddly comfortable. She had spent 4 years in places that smelled much worse and made no apologies for it at all. She was restocking the utility closet near room 318 when she heard the argument. Not unusual. Hospitals had arguments the way other buildings had weather. Constant, varying in intensity, occasionally dangerous. But this one had a particular quality she recognized. The voice doing most of the talking was too controlled, too flat. The voice of someone who had already decided the outcome before the conversation started. "I don't care what the family wants," Dr. Renwick was saying. "I'm the attending. This is my unit, and I don't take protocol suggestions from floor staff who have been here for 3 weeks. The other voice was younger, female, trying to stay steady. "I'm not suggesting. I'm saying his oxygen saturation has been dropping since 2 a.m., and the last 2 readings are, I have his chart, thank you. Dr. Renwick, if we wait until rounds, we will wait until rounds." Vera closed the utility closet quietly and pushed her cart forward. She didn't stop. She didn't look in. But she listened as she passed. The way she had learned to listen in places where the information you needed was almost never the information being offered to you directly. The patient in 318 was named Gerald Obie, 63 years old. Admitted 2 days ago with what the board said was a complicated post-surgical recovery after a bowel resection. She knew this not because anyone had told her, but because Vera Stahl noticed things. She had been trained at considerable expense to the United States Army to notice things. She went back to work. The break room on the 3rd floor had a coffee machine that only worked if you held the button down for exactly 4 seconds and then released it suddenly. Vera had figured this out in her first week. Most of the nurses still fought with it every morning. She was eating a sandwich at the corner table, the one with the wobbly leg that nobody liked. When Lila Morrow came in and dropped into the chair across from her like something had knocked the bones out of her. Lila was 26 and had been a floor nurse for 11 months. She was the one Vera had heard in the corridor. She had dark circles under her eyes that had been there since at least Monday, and she was still wearing her stethoscope, which meant she hadn't actually left the floor, just relocated briefly. "He's not going to listen," Lila said. It wasn't directed at Vera, specifically. It was the kind of thing you say when you need to say it somewhere. Vera finished chewing before she spoke. "Renwick?" Lila looked at her like she'd forgotten Vera was capable of conversation. "You heard that?" Hard not to. "He's been like this since he transferred in from St. Agatha's 6 months ago. Acts like the nurses are furniture." She rubbed her eyes with the back of her wrist. "The patient in 318, Obie, his sats have been dropping incrementally since Tuesday night. I've flagged it twice. Renwick keeps saying it's expected variability post-op. Is it? Leela was quiet for a second. I did 4 clinical rotations in ICU. That pattern isn't variability. That's someone whose body is running out of reserves and getting quieter about it. Vera nodded slowly and looked down at her sandwich. I'm sorry, Lila said, something shifting in her tone. You don't need to hear this. I shouldn't be. It's fine, Vera said. You need to put it somewhere. That's not nothing. Lila looked at her for a moment, with an expression Vera couldn't quite categorize. Then she got up, poured herself coffee using the 4-second trick without seeming to realize she'd done it, and went back to the floor. Vera finished her sandwich. Then she sat very still for a while. She had not planned to stay in housekeeping. That required some explanation, or at least some context. Though Vera had found over the years that context was the thing people wanted least when they were trying to make sense of you. They wanted the short version, the clean version, the version that had a clear reason at the center of it. The clean version was, she had served 2 deployments with the 68 Whiskey. That was the Army's designation for combat medic specialist, and come home in one piece, which was more than she could say for several people she had cared for in the field, and she had tried to go back to civilian nursing the way you try to go back to a house after it's been renovated, knowing it's structurally the same, but finding nothing where you left it. The less clean version was longer and involved specific nights and specific faces, and the particular sound of a helicopter at a certain distance, and she did not go to that version anymore if she could help it. What she had found, unexpectedly, was that the work of cleaning and maintaining a hospital gave her a specific kind of peace she hadn't been able to locate anywhere else. You moved through the space without anyone really seeing you. You kept things functional. You understood what was happening around you without being asked to be the person responsible for the outcome. That last part, for a while, had mattered more than she could have explained. But she still noticed things. She couldn't stop noticing things. It had been 4 years since she'd stopped trying. The code came at 11:47 in the morning. She heard the announcement before the tone finished. Code blue, 3rd floor, room 318. And she was already moving because she had been in the corridor outside the utility room, 2 doors down from 318 for the last 20 minutes, not for any reason she could have articulated to anyone, just because she was. The first person through the door was a resident named Dr. Cho, who looked approximately 22 years old and had the expression of someone who had been thrown into deep water and was calculating very fast how to swim. Behind him came Leela and another nurse named Torrance, and behind them, arriving at a brisk walk that suggested authority without urgency, was Renwick. Vera stood in the doorway. The room was not large. Gerald Obie lay in the bed with his head tilted back and his color wrong. A grayish pallor that Vera recognized the way you recognize a word in a language you learn before you learn to speak. Something that goes into you before cognition catches up. His monitor showed a rhythm that Dr. Cho was staring at with an attention that was starting to tip from focused into frightened. He's in VTAC, Cho said, borderline. He's still. I can see the monitor, Renwick said, moving to the bedside, snapping on a glove. Get me the cart. Torrance moved for the crash cart. Lila was already on the other side of the bed, her fingers at Obie's wrist, her eyes on his face. His pressure's been dropping since 10, Lila said. I charted it. His abdomen feels. Not the time, Renwick said. It's exactly the time. Her voice was very quiet and very clear. I think he's bleeding internally, the resection site. If we shock him out of VTAC and there's active hemorrhage, we're Nurse Morrow. The way he said it was a door closing. Step back. The room had that quality that some rooms get. A held breath. Everyone calculating simultaneously whether to speak or move or stay still. It was in that particular silence that Vera walked through the doorway. She did not announce herself. She moved to the left side of the bed, opposite Lila, and looked at the monitor, and then she looked at Obi's abdomen, and then she did what her hands had been trained to do before her brain had to consciously authorize it. She placed her palm gently below his navel, applied slight pressure, and watched his face respond. He flinched, even unconscious, even that far gone, his body knew to protect that place. Rigid, she said, guarding even under sedation. That's peritoneal. He's bleeding into the abdomen. The room went very quiet in a different way. Renwick turned to look at her. It took him a moment to process what he was seeing. The gray uniform, the environmental services badge, the supply cart still visible in the hallway behind her. Who, he said, are you? Someone who's telling you that if you cardiovert this man right now, without addressing the source, you might get him back into sinus rhythm and then lose him on the table 20 minutes later when he crashes from blood loss. She looked at the monitor again. His pressure, 70/40, Lila said immediately. How long? 10 minutes. Vera nodded. She looked at Cho, not Renwick, because Cho was the one whose face told her he was still capable of being moved by information. You need a stat surgical consult and its bedside ultrasound right now. Not the defibrillator. The ultrasound. Cho looked at Renwick. Renwick looked at Vera like she was something that had appeared in the room without explanation, which she supposed she had. I don't know who you think you. Do you have a portable ultrasound on this floor? She asked. Not challenging, just asking. A beat. Yes, Torrance said carefully from the corner. Bring it. Vera looked at Renwick. Give me 2 minutes. If I'm wrong, you lose 2 minutes. If I'm right, you keep the patient. Something moved across Renwick's face that was too complicated to name. He was not a stupid man. That was actually the thing about people like him that always made the situation harder. They were not stupid. They were just convinced in a particular way that had solidified over years of being correct, often enough to stop accounting for the times they were wrong. He didn't say yes. He didn't say anything. Torrance brought the ultrasound. Vera moved with a speed and economy that came from a different version of herself. The version that still lived somewhere behind her sternum, like a pilot light that never fully went out. She positioned the probe below the left costal margin, adjusted the angle, found what she was looking for in approximately 12 seconds. Free fluid. Significant. The dark pooling on the screen that meant something had torn and was not stopping. She turned the screen so Cho could see it. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. Then he picked up the phone on the wall and called the OR. The surgery took 3 hours and 40 minutes. Vera found out because Lila texted her. They had exchanged numbers 3 weeks earlier over a discussion about the coffee machine at 4:17 in the afternoon. He's out. They found a dehiscence at the anastomosis, caught it in time. He's going to make it. Vera was in the basement at that point, running a cleaning cycle on the utility sink in the equipment room, which was a job that nobody wanted and took exactly the kind of sustained, mindless attention that she needed right now. She read the text twice. Then she set her phone face down on the edge of the sink and went back to work. She didn't tell anyone what she had done. There was no reason to. Obi was going to be okay, and that was the relevant fact. and everything else was just information about how they had gotten there. What she hadn't anticipated was Lila Morrow. Lila came to find her at the end of the shift. Not to the break room, to the basement equipment room, where Vera was logging supply inventory with the kind of focus she usually reserved for tasks that required actual concentration, because the alternative was to stop and let the afternoon catch up with her, which she wasn't ready for yet. "I want to know who you are," Lila said. Not accusatory, not soft, just direct, in the way that someone speaks when they've been carrying a question for several hours and are done being patient with it. "It's on the badge," Vera said. "No, I mean," Lila stopped. "You move to that ultrasound like you've used one 1,000 times. More than that," Vera said, before she could decide not to. Lila waited. Vera set down the clipboard and looked at the shelving unit across from her, which held 24 bottles of isopropyl alcohol in perfect rows, and thought about how much she wanted to say and how much she had spent the last year deliberately not saying, and how those two calculations were suddenly not balancing the way they usually did. 68 whiskey, she said. Army combat medic. 2 deployments, one in Afghanistan, one attached to a special operations task force in Syria. I did field surgery in conditions that would make your crash cart look like a well-funded research hospital. Leela didn't say anything. I came home. I tried nursing school, civilian track. I got 2 semesters in and I couldn't. She stopped, found a different way in. You ever try to explain to someone why something that used to be automatic now requires you to white-knuckle your way through it? And the harder you try to explain, the less sense it makes? PTSD, Lila said quietly. That's the word for it. She picked up the clipboard again. I'm not looking for a different job. I like this one. I move through the building. I see things. I fix things. Nobody asks me to be responsible for outcomes. She paused. Usually. Renwick came to the floor after Obi was in surgery, Lila said. Vera looked at her. He didn't apologize. He's not built for that. But he stood in the hallway outside 318 for about 4 minutes by himself. And when he walked away, he stopped at the nurse's station and he said, she seemed to be choosing her words. He said he'd be reviewing the morning charting protocol, and he said it to me specifically. Vera nodded slowly. That's probably as close as you'll get. From him, yes. Lila hesitated. He asked, who called for the ultrasound? What did Cho say? He said it was a collaborative decision. Vera almost smiled. Good answer. He also asked me about you specifically. I told him I didn't know your background. She paused. That wasn't entirely true. You didn't know it until 30 seconds ago. No. But I had a feeling for weeks. The way you listen. The way you walk through this building like you're reading it, not just moving through it. She crossed her arms, not defensively but thoughtfully. You know what the thing was that made me certain? Before today, I mean. Vera waited. The way you ate your lunch, Lila said, with your back to the wall and the door in your sight line. Every single day. The basement equipment room was very quiet. The ventilation system made a low, constant sound that Vera had stopped hearing after the first week, but could hear now. Old habit, Vera said. I know, said Lila. And then she didn't say anything else, which was exactly the right thing. Gerald Obi was moved out of the ICU on a Thursday. Vera was on the 3rd floor that morning, legitimate reason. A water fixture in the family lounge had been dripping since Tuesday, and facilities had finally approved the repair. She was in the corridor outside his room when his daughter arrived, a woman in her 50s, with the particular expression of someone who had been afraid for days and was only now, cautiously, allowing themselves to stop. She didn't know Vera was there. She went into the room, and through the partially open door, Vera could hear the low murmur of her voice, and then a sound that was not crying exactly but was adjacent to it. The specific release of something that had been held too long. Vera fixed the faucet. She took her time with it, not because it required the time, but because standing in the family lounge with her tools and her cart, and the sound of relief coming from the room down, the hall, was a feeling she had not expected and did not want to rush away from. She had been afraid for a long time that she had lost the capacity for this, for caring about outcomes. Not medically, not technically, but in the way that her body registered someone else's relief as something physically real, something that moved through her sternum and behind her eyes and made her have to set down a wrench for a moment and breathe. She had not lost it. It had just been somewhere quiet for a while, waiting. She did not encounter Renwick again until the following Monday. He was at the elevator when she arrived with her cart, and for a moment, they simply occupied the same 12 square feet of hallway. He looked at her badge. He looked at her face. He had the expression of a man reassembling a calculation he had done wrong the first time. He did not say anything. Neither did she. The elevator came. He got in. She waited for the next one, not because she needed to, but because she wanted the 30-second interval, the specific quiet of a hallway, after someone has just left it. Lila had asked her, the week before, whether she had ever thought about going back. To nursing, to medicine, to anything that would use what she knew, in a way that was legible to the people around her. Vera had thought about it for a long time before answering. "There are days," she had finally said. "There are days when I think about it. What stops you?" "Nothing permanent," she had said, which was different from what she would have said 6 months ago, and she knew it, and Lila seemed to know it too, because she had just nodded and let the sentence be what it was. Obi was discharged on a Friday. She didn't know this until she saw him in the main lobby, walking slowly with a cane and his daughter on his left side, wearing a coat that was slightly too big for him, the way people look when they've lost weight in a hospital. He moved like someone who was relearning how much effort each step required. Vera was crossing the lobby with a replacement light fixture under one arm. He saw her before she saw him. She knew because when she looked up, he was already watching her, and his daughter had turned to follow his gaze. She kept walking. He stopped. "Excuse me," he said. She stopped because not stopping would have been deliberate, and she was not ready to be deliberate about it yet. He looked at her badge, then at her face. He had the eyes of someone who had been very close to something and come back from it, and that proximity had left a residue that would not wash off. "I was told," he said slowly, "by one of the nurses that there was someone who made a call that morning. When things were," he paused, "when things were not going well. A lot of people made calls that morning," Vera said. "It was a team." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite name and didn't try to. "My daughter is getting married in April," he said. "I'm walking her down the aisle." He said it like a fact and like a miracle simultaneously, the way people speak about things that were almost not true. "I'm going to walk her down the aisle." Vera held the light fixture under her arm and said, "That's a good thing, yes," he said. "It is." He nodded at her once, the kind of nod that carries more than it appears to, and then he and his daughter moved toward the exit, and Vera watched them go through the lobby doors into the gray February light, and then she turned and went back to work. The light fixture needed to go to the second floor. The elevator was slow. She took the stairs. She did not think about Kandahar, or the dust, or the specific weight of a body on a stretcher moving fast over uneven ground. She did not think about the things she had set down and the things she had not been able to. She thought about a man in a coat that was slightly too big for him, walking toward a door, and the particular quality of light on the other side of it. Some days, that was enough. Some days, it was more than enough. She pushed through the stairwell door onto the second floor and kept going.